excellent. Maybe on folks online too. So this is the second year that we've done this series, and we're delighted to kick it off this semester with 5 stellar members from our Industry Advisory Board who are meeting with us this week. We have Terry McVenes, Kim Pyle, Houston Mills, Lacey Pittman, and Mike Ginter. They will do brief introductions to themselves once we get started. And they are going to be joined in conversation by 4 excellent students here at Embry-Riddle, 3 undergrads and 1 grad student. So we have Aspen Rosica, who is a bachelor's degree student in aeronautics, Faith Lee studying aerospace engineering, Julia Dentinger studying aeronautical science, and Heather Bond, who is working on her master's in human factors. So a couple of different perspectives, the engineering side, the flying side, and we're really excited. This is an open dialogue, so they've all prepared questions for our IAB members about the current state of aviation safety and issues that are on their minds. So we will have them ask all of their questions, and then we'll open it up to all of you, either in person or online, to ask your questions about the current state of aviation safety. I think we all know it's been a challenging year. And so the intent of this is to have an open, robust, thoughtful conversation about how perhaps we got here and how to move forward. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. If you could just briefly introduce yourselves, we'll go around, and then Heather, you can kick us off with the first question.
Oh, good afternoon. First of all, thank you all for being here, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel. Really exciting day we had today. My name is Terry McVenes. I am recently retired. I have a degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Colorado, go Buffs, but spent most of my career as an airline pilot, 30 years flying, spent another 10 years at Boeing after my piloting career, and then led an organization in Washington, D.C. called RTCA, which develops aviation performance standards for aircraft, air traffic control systems, et cetera.
Hi, I'm Kim Pyle. I just retired from the Federal Aviation Administration, where I was the Executive Director of Accident Investigation and Prevention. And I was there until May, at the end of May this year. And then I got in on this deferred resignation program that you might have heard of, that DOGE was offering, that said, if you pass the baton to the next generation of leaders, we'll let you do early retirement. So I took early retirement. I'm here to say it's good to see a lot of new faces in the room to come in and take our places in leadership in aviation, because it's time for a new generation. And I hope that you can learn from our mistakes and use your creativity to come up with new solutions to solve challenging problems. So I'm excited to be here and just happy to talk to you all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Captain Houston Mills. I'm president of flight operations for UPS Airlines. I'm a 40-year aviation veteran and 9 years in the United States Marine Corps as an F-18 pilot. I'm currently a captain of 7576, and I have the honor of serving about 3,500 pilots, about 4,000 folks in flight operations at UPS. And so really excited to be here with you and look forward to the panel and the questions.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Lacey Pittman, also a captain at the airlines for 16 years. I am currently the Vice President of Global Aerospace Safety at Boeing, and I've been at Boeing for about 4 years. Before Boeing, I was with Amazon Air, so the e-commerce cargo network with a fleet of 767s across the globe, where I led operations within our network control center and all of safety for Amazon Air. And I'll just say before that is when I was at the airlines, and I held multiple 119 positions. So director of safety, director of operations, and then I was assistant chief pilot at our Portland base. And then even before that, I'll just share humanitarian work. So I lived in West Africa. I flew King Air 200s in support of all of the refugee camps throughout all of West Africa. And it was just where I began my career. And I just wanted to mention that to you because it's absolutely, that work as a humanitarian pilot, where every life, every flight is life and death. What I've taken from that is really bringing it to every role that I have had the opportunity to serve in. And how can I serve my team? How can I serve the people around me and make this industry the safest possible? And so look forward to talking with you about safety, about airline operations, e-commerce, humanitarian, wherever you guys want to go. That'll be great.
All right, my name is Mike Ginter, and I'm the Senior Vice President of AOPA's Air Safety Institute, which makes me the General Aviation Part 91 representative at the table. And I'm very proud to say that I'm a 1983 grad of this campus, Aeronautical Studies. Yes. Thank you, go Eagles. Chasing the airline dream when I left here, I ended up going into the Navy, fell in love with it, flew off carriers for 21 years. Then I flew a desk for 6, then retired. And now I work for AOPA. I've owned 3 airplanes. I still own 2 with my wife. And aviation's a passion for me. It's not really a profession. I've figured out a way to stay in this as a profession to pay for the passion, which I think is all of our goals. So we at the Air Safety Institute have the job of reducing the general aviation accident rate, and we cannot do it through edict or requirement or policy or enforcement action. We do it by trying to inspire pilot behaviors through really unique and educational content. So they watch it and then they change their behavior. And we think it's working because the accident rate in general aviation has never been lower. 2024 was a great year. It'd probably be the best year on record. 25 we're beating last year already. So we're doing something right. And I'm happy to take all the questions. And don't forget, I'm an alum.
Okay, I'm going to start off with the first question with collision avoidance and specifically general aviation. And specifically general aviation, are we seeing signs that pilots are becoming overly reliant on ADS-B traffic displays at the expense of visual scanning and situational awareness? And if so, how can we avoid this complacency and increase situational awareness?
I've got it written down, so let's redo the first part and then we'll do every one of those.
Sorry, it's just 2 parts.
It's okay.
Yeah, so the first part is just, are we seeing complacency with ADS-B in general aviation?
As a function of midair collisions. We see 2 to 3 midairs a year in general aviation. Last year was a little bit of a spike with 4 because there were 3 actual midairs in the crop dusting world, which was a perturbation. Usually there's 1. So 2 to 3 a year on average. And even with a spike of 25%, went from 3 to 4 last year, we didn't go to general quarters to try to figure it out. And is ADS-B contributing to that? I can't say conclusively if all of the aircraft that collided in 24 or 25 so far had been ADS-B equipped. Whether they were ADS-B in-equipped is the question, right? If they were in rule airspace, they would have had to been ADS-B out-equipped. That doesn't mean they had it coming in. And if it was it on a iPhone hanging on an iPad mount or RAM mount, or was it embedded in a screen? If you're in the cockpit on the pattern, you're looking outside, probably not staring at the screen. There's a ton of human factors that get involved. So I doubt that ADS-B is helping or hurting the midair collision, right? If you're staring at ADS-B, you might actually be contributing to a problem if you're not looking outside the cockpit, belly up, looking for somebody on this long straight in. It's usually what happens. That's what happened a couple months ago. So I don't think ADS-B is the problem. In fact, I think it's the solution. I think another part of the solution is better adherence, better knowledge and understanding of traffic pattern procedures, especially when you have VMC and inbound IFRs that want to do the straight in and people doing practice pattern circuits and now they have to figure out who's on final, how far out. And, we're actually beating up some of the straight in IFR traffic to go ahead and end the pattern and play nice. So
I agree. I think with entering patterns, there's a lot of discussion of how do you enter that, especially in these uncontrolled airspaces. So I was just curious if ADS-B and synthetic vision had any factor on that. And do you think, just along the same lines of that, do you think in flight training we should be encouraging the use of ADS-B or more of like visual?
Yes, absolutely encouraging. I say that emphatically, short of asking the FAA to mandate equipage. I think we're going to see a little bit increase in the ADS equipage to include ADS-B in rule airspace. We think we hear those tremors coming out of the FAA, and I'm thinking AOPA is probably going to love that. but mandating 209,000 general aviation airplanes to equip ADS-B in and out when they can fly from Western Maryland to the West Coast without talking to a single control person or a radar facility. We don't think we should do that to our fleet. So I think we'll see an ADS-B in mandate in rural airspace, and I think AOPA will probably love that.
Thank you for that. Just to open it up to you all as well, I'm going to skip down some questions and continue this mid-air collision avoidance because it is a really important topic in aviation currently, especially after some events that have happened this past year. So my question is, what innovations or procedures do you believe hold the most promise to reducing these incidents moving forward? So what are you all doing or what are you seeing in your flight departments that are helping prevent these problems?
Maybe I can start and I can just talk a little bit about some of the activities that we're doing within Boeing around the globe. We are investing heavily in training. We are changing the way that our training footprint looks and exactly what it is. Historically, Boeing has provided task-based training. And that task-based training is then essentially used by the airlines around the globe. So the airlines around the globe have different regulators. So of course, we in the US have the FAA, but for airlines that are in different parts of the world have their own regulator, and that training needs to be approved by that regulator. And we have found that there is opportunity beyond task-based training that we could offer that then could be adopted by airlines and have those regulators approve it. And that includes additional competencies, competency-based training and assessment. And so we are currently updating all of our training programs in every one of our aircraft models and developing the tools that can be used with that training. And then we are beginning to deploy that training around the globe to different airlines. And then many regulators have already approved that type of training. And I mention this because competencies, it's things like communication, things like leadership. So when we talk about any type of threat, and you name one of them, but any type of threat that can be encountered in the flight deck, having the competencies that allow a pilot to be able to respond to any threat within the flight deck, and maybe it's a multiple threats happening at the same time that maybe we wouldn't have ever envisioned putting together in the normal task-based environment of training. Instead, if we train to the competencies, we really believe that we're creating and we're upping the, we're raising the bar on the level of pilots and what they can handle and respond to.
So I would give you a pilot's perspective. And so when I go out and fly and the way we train our pilots at UPS and in most pilot programs, if you look at TCAS and other tools that exist today are very, have been very successful. Now you've got a lot of new users that are entering airspace, right? You got eVTOL, you got drones, you got other things that are coming that don't necessarily have the same equipage. So now you got more risk that are all of a sudden entering the NAS. And this is especially true for general aviation, right? And so I think one thing that becomes awareness, the see and avoid concept is still powerful, right? You got to have a scan. So this goes for everybody. You got to get out of the cockpit. The technology is there to assist you, but it's not there to totally keep you away from harm's way. The other thing is that's important for pilots, I think, is to know before you go. In other words, do a real good sweep of what's the threats, what's the risk, where am I going? Is this a high traffic area? Is this a low traffic area? Are there helicopters there? Are there other types? Is this a place where folks have parachutes? I mean, we as pilots can prepare and expect the unexpected. And so the technology certainly will come and really on the air side, pretty good. On the ground, particularly talk about ADS-BN, And certainly from a controller perspective, ground controllers, there's more technology that are going to help pilots prevent runway incursions, perhaps prevent pilots from doing other things and bumping into each other, you name it. And so there's definitely technology that's forthcoming. But from an aviation flying perspective, I think it's really the existing technology is good. It's us not over relying on it and really preparing before you actually get in that operation.
I think from the system design standpoint, from looking at how the airspace is designed and developed and what the corridors are and what the appropriate separation is and who is flying where, we need to do a better job leaning into technology to do some digital twinning of the airspace system and trial and testing instead of waiting till things happen in real life. We can design a more resilient system that has more tolerance for mistakes. And I think we have kind of relied on exceptional behavior by exceptional people for so long that we just assume it's going to always go right. And what we learned, sadly, in March was that it doesn't always go the way it's supposed to go. And so what is the responsibility of those who manage system design and control access to that area? So there's a responsibility on all sides to apply this technology to solve problems. And I think there's huge potential there.
I think everybody's probably said everything I was going to say and more, but certainly technology and the use of data is really good for flight planning. We've got a lot of abilities to predict areas of runway incursions and predict areas of where there could be mid-air collisions, ensuring that we have that data available and so that it can become part of the flight planning is good. But the other side of it is things can still happen in wide open skies. So nothing replaces the eyeballs sometimes for preventing those mid-air collisions. And so even though you may think you're not going into an area of high traffic, it doesn't mean you keep your head down in the cockpit either.
We've even seen here in our flight department where students have increased their reliance on automation, which from then, right, we're raising pilots, teaching pilots that it's okay to look inside the flight deck 24/7, and it's not. So we've been meeting in the flight department recently and been pushing instructors to tell their students to look outside, look outside, look outside. Even if you're training for an instrument procedure, right, still look outside, keep your eyes out at all times. So thank you for emphasizing that. It's extremely important, not only in commercial, but in private aviation and general aviation. So.
Is it on? Yeah, let's just making sure it's on. To pick back up on that, in the realm of technology, automation, et cetera, with the rise of AI automation, how can the aviation industry balance innovative strategies while maintaining the highest levels of safety in this industry? With respect to AI, correct?
I would love to talk about this because I think that this is where we want to start experimenting in safe spaces. So just like we did with drone technology, and we would find safe spaces to experiment and fail, so we need to do the same with AI. We need to find ways to use chat GPTs to solve maybe problems in research or being an assistant to design, but not in live scenarios and not making decision-making in real time. But we do need to start practicing with this and technology. We need to start testing it. We need to start thinking about how could I apply this? What could I do with this? Is there something else I could do? Could it help me? Does it allow me to stand on the shoulder of a giant so that I can see a little bit further? And I think if you approach it like that with curiosity and positive outlook, what you'll see is a potential tool, not a solution, but a tool that you can use to do the things that machines do really great, like collate, aggregate, calculate, and then the humans can still be the creative geniuses and idea developers that we are. So there's a way to partner with it. I would encourage you to try it.
Yeah, I spoke at a class this morning on that particular topic, and one of the things that's interesting is how often AI is wrong. And depending upon the application of it, it can be anywhere from, they've done studies, whether it's in medicine or law or even engineering, that it can be wrong anywhere from 10 to 90% of the time. So even if it's wrong 10% of the time, is that good enough for aviation safety? Probably not. But at the same time, I think there's some real benefits to the data analysis world, that where we can learn some things. Again, really having a critical eye towards that. It's being used at a number of the airlines, again, for the analysis of ASAP reports, but it hasn't replaced the human that's doing that analysis. I told the class today about, I put a thing in ChatGPT in preparation for the class today, and I wanted to show just how bad it can be. And I said, oh, I'm going to write an essay about a recent planet that NASA has discovered that's made entirely of diamonds. Tell me about that planet and its impact to aviation weather. It gave me a beautiful answer about the name of the planet, where it was located, how it was formed. The only right answer in it was it said it had no impact on aviation weather. But the entire narrative that it gave me was completely made up. But it assumed what I put in was a fact. So you got to be careful what you put into that model, that AI model, to ensure that what you're getting out is actually making some sense.
It wants to please you, so you
Yeah,
have to be
exactly.
careful. It really wants to give you the answer you want to hear, so you have to provide context.
Yeah, I was just going to add, it's a really good question. And I think particularly for the students here, right, this is the next big thing. And everybody wants to know, what's that mean? I will say that it's certainly, and I agree with Kim, using it and learning about how to use the tool personally, and then how can it help you get better? Not as a substitute from learning yourself and knowing your stuff, because then when you do use the tool, you aren't, taking the tool for what it's providing you, right? And so it's going to be really important. And we at UPS, we have an AI learning committee. And this committee is tasked to go and learn all about the tool, learn all about the governance. What are the rules that we can play? What are the proprietary things within? And I tell the team, you can do anything that you want inside the circle. You can fail, you can create, you can innovate. But if you want to come out the circle, we need to make sure we validate and we need to get permission, right? Because those are real bullets. Those are real systems that are impacting. And in that world, you can use it to understand data, but you still have to validate it. Now, when it comes to systems, there's autonomous aircraft flying. The military is doing already all over the world very successfully. The question is, how does that integrate into the most complex and safest aviation ecosystem in the world? The rules haven't been developed yet. They're still under the process. We have to move fast because it's going to happen. The question is, how do you safely integrate those systems into what we currently do? I can tell you, we own Boeing 757s, 767s, 747s, A300s, MD-11s. All those aircraft are manned systems. We spent billions of dollars. So if you want to come fly for UPS, come on, because those airplanes aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And Congress hasn't mandated right now any totally autonomous, 777 or any other aircraft right now. There's nothing on the board. Now, is that going to happen 10 years or 20 years from now? I'm pretty sure there's going to be dramatic. You guys are going to see changes that we can't even think about. But right now, you also have to be the stewards of responsible usage of AI. You have to learn, but don't sacrifice knowing your stuff in the process of learning, because then you can validate, you can question, always question. When someone brings you an AI solution, you validate it. Don't take it for its word. And I think it's going to be very important for all of us aviation safety professionals. How do we use it? I've got folks right now saying, how can I use AI to assist us in our training programs for our pilots? And so, okay, that's great. It's going to be a great tool. But guess what? The training that these pilots get, they're flying real world missions. It better be right. So we better validate that the training that they're receiving is good. So I think it's a combination of really understanding what we want and then leveraging, as Kim said, as a tool to really take advantage of the technology.
Yeah, maybe I would just add one more thing, and it's a lot of what's already been said, but there's a reason as pilots, we study systems, the systems of the aircraft that we fly. And that is so that we can understand those limitations. And so that we can make the decision as the pilot from what the system is telling us, what the automation is telling us. At the end of the day, as the pilot, you are in command of that airplane, not the automation. You are making the decision. And so when it comes to AI, it's about understanding those limitations. Approach it with that same pilot philosophy, in that understand what that tool can provide, understand that there are limitations, understand that the information it is feeding you still requires your judgment, and you are in control of how you take that or don't take that information.
And I'll just to kind of build on just 1 minute, be careful also about equating automation with AI. They're two different things. You know, automation, you know, there's some pretty good set standards there in terms of how you certify that automation. In AI right now, there aren't any. FAA is working on it with some of the standards organizations, but you can't really look under the hood yet and see what is the certification basis for some of that AI. That's why I think it's going to be a while before we actually see it in the cockpit.
No, I was just going to summarize it from a knuckle dragon Part 91 GA pilot. AI to me is like an autopilot. Way back when we had wing levelers and it was awesome equipment, and you trusted it, but you didn't rely on it for the whole flight. Now there's GFC 500s from Garmin's, GFC 600s, triple axis, you know, altitude capture, everything else, and you still better be able to hand fly the approach. So every autopilot, you better be able to say what's it doing now and why, and answer it, which is to your point, completely know the system well. So that's what that's my analogy. It's like an autopilot. Study it, play with it, use it, but don't rely on it. 100%.
Yes, it is. Hello, is it on? Okay. You can't tell when you're speaking into it if it's on. Okay, so switching gears a little bit. Over the summer, Newark International Airport experienced a lot of major issues due to air traffic control system failures, lack of staffing, and the ongoing construction of their runway. Do you think the situation could have been handled better than it was? And how can we prevent situation like these from happening again, because there's always going to be construction at airports? So
Okay, everybody's going to jump in this. I'll jump in first as an operator. I would never pass judgment, because in the world of safety, if the system's speaking, you got to acknowledge it. And so the FAA did exactly what they should have done. The system was speaking. It was overwhelmed for a variety of reasons. And it's like we call safety timeout, right? And what happens sometimes, and this is something all of you students need to be careful of, sometimes operational pressures can cause you to do things that you shouldn't do. The folks at the FAA could have very easily said, United, UPS, American, all these airlines, they need to have all these flights. We're just going to push it. Next thing you know, you got a big problem. So they didn't. Now, the public might not want to hear that, but it was actually the right call. Now, we have an aging infrastructure that we know, and there's investments that need to be made, believe it or not. And I had the privilege of serving on the FAA Management Advisory Council. So I'm one of 13 executives in the country who have the privilege of, advising the FAA administrator. And so this particular topic was brought up, over a year ago. There's been plans. The challenge has been getting the appropriate appropriations from Congress to get it. They finally got it. So we're moving. And so if you say, hey, what could have been done better? We could have had a lot more money. We could have started investing in infrastructure years ago, but you can't change the past. Let's look forward. But I would say in terms of the response based on the safety needs, what happened needed to happen, and it was a really good call. It was painful for everyone, but it was the right call for safety reasons.
So we were trying to modernize the air traffic control system, and that's when I was hired on in 1998 to modernize the standard terminal automation replacement system, or STARS, and then ERAM, which, so if you're in ATM, you're learning how to use these systems. They really haven't progressed much since 1998 when I started. And I will say that every year we had a plan to modernize them and replace and repair and refresh. And every year our budget was capped at a certain number. but every year the controller salaries got higher, but the budget was the same. It was flat. And so what you see is this gap in the capital money that you have to spend on infrastructure improvements. And you can't, you need a surge funding in order to modernize equipment. And we have the surge funding now. I think to Houston's point is it's better to be safe than sorry. And in the case of traffic pressure, it's gotten to the point where I think we may have experienced what happens when you try to accept too many planes into a system that can't handle it. And we don't want to do that again. So I'm grateful that there were delays, because maybe we need to look at scheduling. Maybe we need to change the way that, every airline wants to fly into this airport at 7 o'clock at night because it'll get you home in time for dinner. Maybe that's not a good way to manage. And so we have to partner and collaborate with the industry. I think FAA is beginning to do that. And of course, controllers, we need more controllers. So thank you to everyone who's studying ATM. We're hiring.
Okay, I'm going to switch to introductory flight training stuff. Has the shift towards recognizing only the first indication of a stall in training left pilots vulnerable to actual stall spin scenarios, especially at low altitudes in the pattern and high stress environment?
Yes.
Yes.
And I'm the old schooler. I've argued this with Kim, who she and I chaired the General Aviation Joint Safety Committee, which is an incredible body, government and industry working together. I'm still a product of, I had to get spin training. And my wife just got her license 4 months ago, and she didn't have to do it. In fact, her instructor, 350-hour ATP grad, I think he saw one spin to get his CFI. Is that right? Yeah. So we're about ready to send her down to see Patty Wagstaff and learn how to fly an airplane. So that's the old schooler in me, but yeah, totally. If I believe that you can't get comfortable on the edge of the envelope unless you hang out there a little bit, and you need to do it with qualified instructors. Over.
I fully agree. The spin training part, I'm kind of old school too, but at the same time, I also know that there's been a lot of unnecessary fatalities because of it. Whether some of those would have been preventable because of everything that happened, I don't know. But certainly approaches a stall are one thing, a stall is something else. And if you don't understand the performance of the airplane at that edge or below that edge of the envelope, you don't really know the airplane, in my view.
So that sometimes the policymakers that are making these decisions are not the most expert pilots in the room, or sometimes they're not a pilot at all. And they're just data nerds that are looking at the data and saying, well, look at this. I think if we stopped doing this, and you're not sure how that variable change is going to impact the system as a whole. So you always need to be cautious, and you always need to do what you must do to be excellent, because you want to focus on being your personal best. And that includes, your mindset when you show up and being rested. And I'm not a pilot, so I can't tell you what else you need to do.
To bounce off of Heather and then also keep this part of the conversation going, because I do think it's important to all of you, what are some real world or biggest challenges that flight programs are facing now with emerging technologies, with different types of aircraft, with different FAA implementations? What are some things you guys decide to harp on? And then also, what are some things that you don't necessarily think is that big of a concern yet?
So I'll jump in. I know there'll be some other folks that want to. I would say from a technology perspective, we do a pretty good job of training pilots on the systems and integrating those. So I wouldn't say I have any concerns about technology. I would say, but what I do think about, I think about this crazy world that we live in. It's very okay. In fact, I think it was 1985 or it's a time back. The Army War College did a study, and they say we live in this environment that's VUCA, a world full of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so businesses start to use that as well. And so today, when I think about geopolitical events that are going on around the world, I think about conflicts where increasingly our global operations folks are having to deviate. So my dispatchers are having to plan differently. Our pilots are going to have to think differently. Missiles start to fly, things start to happen. My folks are airborne flying real world operations. There's a lot of change going on. So from that perspective, and quite frankly, I tell folks to keep politics out of the cockpit because it's just so divisive. And I'm a firm believer, you believe in what you believe, and that's okay. I respect you. But in the cockpit, it's got to be a very neutral environment. You can't afford folks to be so upset with you over one statement that now they aren't backing you up when you're flying. It's crazy, but people will do it. And it happens all the time. There's so many accidents that have happened because people have allowed other things. So the things that concern me today is making sure that folks don't allow those outside distractions to come inside the cockpit, to damage relationships, to become complacent because they're over-relying on systems, to not be prepared because they've done this over and over and over. And so they aren't being diligent. They aren't striving to be excellent. They aren't seeking perfection. They might not be perfect, but that should be the goal, right? What do you benchmark yourself against? How precise are you going to be? When I had the honor of flying F-18s, I remember I would be taxiing. I might be 1 foot off center line, right, Mike? And that instructor, what are you doing? You're the stinkiest pilot I've ever seen. I'm like 6 inches off the center line. Get on center line. If you can be 6 inches off center line, you can get on center line. Or I'd be flying, I'd be 10 foot off altitude. What, golly. You expect to fly my Marine Corps being 10 feet off altitude? If you can fly 10 feet off altitude, get on altitude. And so it was indoctrinated. Be precise. Don't be satisfied with something less than excellence. Don't be satisfied with something that's not precise. Don't allow things that you know that others might not agree with you on to come into a cockpit that can disrupt safety and tear apart relationships. So for me, it's the things that we don't control that propose the most risk. I think internally we've got the systems that are resilient. We have the training that'll help pilots, but people sometimes can't help themselves from those things that are coming outside. And I think that's what we have control over, and we have to really prepare ourselves against.
On probably a more boring level than Houston's example. You know, as we've looked at the speed at which technology is being developed, and it's going really fast. Some of the new entrants with urban air mobility and advanced air mobility and all these things, these Silicon Valley companies, if you will, are just moving very rapidly. In safety, as we develop the standards and the regulatory basis for these new systems, it moves very slowly, and for a good reason. But there's a frustration level, I think, with some in the new entrants and how we develop standards, how we get the certification done on those new systems, because by the time sometimes we get them done, they've already moved on to the next generation of automation or technology. So that's a challenge. How can we do better to ensure that safety standards aren't being compromised while still embracing new technology that's coming forth at a very fast pace? That's going to be a continued problem.
I was just going to say, I think there's an opportunity for different levels of risk and experimentation. So like it's a risk continuum. So in the highest, most important or impactful parts of aviation, like part 121, you really don't want to experiment too much there, but you could experiment at a lower level with less regulations and more trial in spaces that are less risky. So maybe drones, we can start experimenting there. Agriculture has the most fatalities in general aviation often because of the way they're flying. So maybe let's automate that cockpit first, not the one in the UPS, or just not one that's a huge plane that could really cause serious damage if it goes wrong. So before you start testing things out, please test them carefully in little small areas. But do be open-minded and also know that they're going to fail as you're testing. Sorry, Lacey.
Yeah, I was, when you asked the question and about flight schools and students in flight schools, I thought of 3 words right away. And I thought of preparation, perspective, and professionalism, I guess is what came to my mind. So in terms of preparation, with the technology and the systems that are on the aircraft that you're about to fly, the automation, how can I, as a pilot at a flight school, be most prepared for that flight that I'm about to take? How do I not just show up day of and then go for my flight? How do I do the honest preparation to study, to learn, to be prepared? And then when I'm in the flight, and when I could be potentially distracted by the automation, how do I think about perspective? Am I sucked down and into all of the automation in my displays that maybe weren't there a couple decades ago, but they are there now? How do I shift my perspective to look up and out and make sure that I am looking out the window? And then in terms of professionalism, when I think about flight schools, I hired pilots for 16 years as base chief pilot at a regional airline. So when I think about the times when I would interview so many people coming out of flight schools as a potential pilot at that airline, it was all about professionalism. So how do you think about professionalism before your flight in terms of preparation? During the flight in terms of your perspective, and then even how I show up. And I've told this story, and maybe you've heard it if I've been in another platform here at the school before, but I was doing we had hired some pilots, and I was a base chief pilot in the Portland airport for a regional airline, and we had ramp planing and deplaning. And one of our pilots, his airplane, an airline, a 121 airline flight, was further down on the ramp. And so he pulled his skateboard out of his backpack and he got on his skateboard, and in front of all the windows from where the passengers are waiting for their airplane, he pulled his flight bag and he skateboarded all the way down to his flight. And that was probably very expeditious, and he got there in time. But I question, what did the passengers think in terms of professionalism? What was that communicating to others? Was it potentially showing he was late? And as a passenger, would you think, is that person actually late for other things? Are they preparing the flight? Have they really done the preparation? What will their perspective be in the flight deck? All of these things. So it's things like that where you think about, is what I'm about to do, am I putting myself am I going to be displaying myself in the most professional manner that I could? And so when I think about flight school and threats and automation, those 3 things do come to mind about the preparation and the perspective and the professionalism.
I appreciate your sincerity of these answers so far. Switching gears, there was mention of urban air mobility. So my question for all of you who have worked in this realm, what are the biggest safety concerns with the rise of urban air mobility and electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles?
So I had the privilege of serving on 2 federal advisory committees. First was the Drone Advisory Committee, which really worked on how do we integrate UAS into the National Airspace System. And then secondly, working with the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee, which was eVTOL, which was integrated with it. And I can tell you that the challenges that the administrator tasked the committee with was how do we safely integrate these new users into the airspace. And I can tell you, eVTOL, they're using existing rules, right? They're using the same rules that helicopters fly. What they're working through now are the certification of the aircraft. And so they're following existing systems, right, Jerry? Rules, standards. And so these aircraft are going to be certified the same way any other aircraft is certified. So I think from a public perspective, we can all feel very comfortable that once these aircraft, they're going to be certified like any other helicopter. Now, what's different with the eVTOL is they have to build the infrastructure. All right. So there's a lot of work right now with these vertiports. And there's companies like United, like American, like Delta, who have integrated or entered into contracts with Beta and Joby and some of the other, actually in with Boeing, with your eVTOL company. And so what does that look like? It's coming pretty quick. What we don't know is what the public's going to accept from a noise perspective and how frequently those things are happening. There's some operators who said they've solved for the noise problem. We'll have to wait and see. But certainly infrastructure is a challenge. How close do those existing, those new users come to big airports, say Orlando? And someone was just mentioning to us that there might be an eVTOL company that establishes a route from Orlando to Embry. That'll be a nice little flight. Really save a lot of time. The question is, how close does it get to the airport? Because we just saw what happened in DC, right, with a lot of traffic around there with other aircraft. So those rules still need to be developed. So I think from that perspective, FAA certainly will be working very closely with those users. Where are they allowed to go? How close do they get with existing operations? You certainly can't get them anywhere near where you got passenger aircraft going in and out. So that whole airspace flow is going to have to be developed.
I'd like to point out that the technology has probably and will continue to outpace policy and probably public perception. I don't know which is second, which is third, but technology is first. We've been landing hands off on the carrier since I did it in 1985, and that wasn't on the front side of that. They were doing it since the late 70s. Hands off on the carrier at night with jets, you know, on a pretty integrated autopilot system. It's a lot faster and more reliable now. And there's now drones flying off carriers integrated with manned aircraft, and they're giving gas and getting gas from other airplanes. It's pretty cool. Technology is way ahead of policy and perception. So I'm an optimist and all that. I'm very excited from my AOPA seat to see a solution to integrating safely the unmanned aerial systems with all of us, the airliners when they're down low, and all of us who kind of live down low, 1, 2, 3, 4,000 feet. Helicopters especially, they live at 400 feet. So I know there was a lot of discussion in the industry of how to integrate the not the eVTOLs, but the UAS, and it was we rejected the 400 feet and below as theirs because we all have to go through that to take off and land. It didn't kind of work, right? So, and the helicopters don't like it either. So see and avoid, sense and avoid was the key. And I am not up to speed on it. You probably are, but I hope that's been solved. But that's what I'm waiting for when these become full blown. And I'm very happy to see eVTOLs come into the system. They'll be manned, of course, but at least for the begin with. But I think it's a cool evolution. Where I was in 1981 to 83 in this campus, and where you all are now. I told the class that I spoke with today, I would trade places with any one of you right here, right now. Salary, airplanes, truck, everything, but I get to keep what I know and start where you are. So
you said salary, and I saw a couple of students' eyes pop open. I go, wait a minute, can you get that in writing there, Mike? Okay.
That's how much fun it was.
I think there are going to be impacts that we haven't anticipated. I think that the batteries are going to be a challenge. We see that with the increase in electric cars, and you're seeing shipping containers catch fire and sink in the middle of the ocean. When you had that concentrated battery power around to provide that infrastructure for the eVTOLs, you're going to have new risks. You're going to have new threats. I think you're going to see a shift in demographics of where the activity is at the airport that are towered, that require air traffic controllers. Just like after the pandemic, we had this big shift down to Florida airports becoming very popular when we couldn't leave the country, right? So the air traffic controllers in some facilities maybe aren't ready for this level of traffic. And we saw this also in places like Santa Barbara, where the carriers, the UPS and FedEx carriers, cargo carriers had started, because of the internet and Amazon, delivering packages and using feeder airports that formerly only GA used. And then the air traffic controllers aren't quite ready for this increase in traffic and the complexity and the mix. So there's that kind of impact. It's not just in the cockpit, but around the system that we need to have people thinking about, how am I going to manage that potential risk? So I hope there's a lot of new ideas in this audience.
And I'm really curious the business model, because you talk about the integration of them into the system, which is, I agree, that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. But then you talk about the business model that's going to be required to make these companies profitable when you're only carrying 2 or 4 or maybe 6 people on a trip. That means you have to get some volume up there. Oh, that means more of these aircraft, which just expands the whole integration piece. So I'm going to be really curious to watch the business models that some of these companies develop to see how it fits. And so that'll be fun to watch, I think, in the future.
Okay, switching gears quite a bit here. So in the past week or 2 weeks, the House of Representatives passed the new pilot mental health bill to give the FAA more opportunities to provide mental health resources for pilots. How are you or other professionals with their pilots at airlines, and test pilots, advocacy, FAA? How do you plan to encourage your pilots to actually use these resources and break the sort of stigma in a lot of their minds that seeking help will damage their career?
Yeah, so I think the FAA obviously sets the rules, right? Because there's one thing there's few professions where your license and your very livelihood could be taken away, just like that. And so I really applaud the FAA for moving down, and Congress for moving down this path to establish a framework where folks who need help can get help. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want, right? You want folks to be able to come forward, get the help they need, recover, and then get back in an area that they enjoy doing. I think all of us would agree that's the best possible outcome. And in a lot of ways, it's like the Aviation Safety Action Program, where we've encouraged folks to report without fear of reprisal. Non-punitive reporting systems actually improves safety, not decreases it. And so in a very similar way, once you get a safe place where folks can self-report and get help, ultimately the entire system is going to be better. And oh, by the way, I suspect that the medical professional is going to learn some things that can be shared with industry that'll help proactively in a very similar way that we've learned from the data we've gathered from safety programs.
I'm a huge advocate for evolving our approach to mental health. I had mentioned I'm not a pilot. I can't get a medical. I have neurodivergent, diverse brain, right? My brain is different than yours if you're a pilot with a first class or second class medical. And actually, I think Elon Musk and several other people who are disruptors in the technology space also have this kind of a brain. So you're going to see there's a need for people of all kinds of mindsets and capabilities in the system. And it's just a matter of finding the right safe place for you to work. So I think aviation is a huge ecosystem. I don't think it's only about being a pilot or a controller. I think there's a lot of space for folks. So if you do find yourself blocked in that space, please continue to pursue your passion. But also, I probably could be a pretty good pilot. And after, flying with my cousins who I know they have the same genetics as me, and they're teaching people how to fly, I know that there's a space for us. So I would just like to say, I'd like to see more progress.
Let's go ahead and give all of our students and panelists a round of applause. We are coming up on time, but we've got a few minutes for just a couple of quick audience questions. So if you have one, go ahead and raise your hand. Evelyn will pass the mic around. And if you're online, you can type your question into the chat.
In general aviation, I've been noticing a lot of pilots expecting automation in their aircraft and losing a lot of hand flying proficiency because of automation. What are some of the challenges with general aviation expecting automation, since the automation can take you down to 200 feet for a Cat 1 ILS approach and can do a hold for you, and I'm worries me about pilots losing proficiency in those skills when the automation fails.
Can I be brutally honest?
Yeah.
The challenge is on the CFIs to not recommend pilots who aren't competent for their check rides, and the challenge is on the DPEs or the stage checkers not to pass pilots who can't do it. The system isn't broke. It's you've got to be held accountable to the standards, and the standards are, I guess, most of the time written in blood. So it's a constant challenge. You have to keep your proficiency up, even if you demonstrate the proficiency once. You have to, do it again and again. That's what I would say is the system works. Let's make the system work. And if you have a CFI or a DPE or you're a stage checker, do your job.
I've never seen an automation system that's 100% reliable. And if it's going to fail, you better know how to handle the airplane if it fails. And the only way you do that is through having good pilot skills.
I would add maybe a global perspective on that, beyond just even a student pilot. So we have been investing in sending out resources to help with safety around the globe in support of airlines that fly Boeing aircraft. And we have made a number of observations. And some of those observations transcend a region or any culture group. And it is one of these areas of proficiency at hand flying, that is a skill that almost at any level, I think you mentioned student pilot, but I would say any level in the flight deck could benefit from being proficient at hand flying. And so the professionalism as a pilot and understanding that I myself need more time at manual flying, I need to make sure that I am practicing that skill. So that is at the right approach, at the right airport, on the right day with the right weather, choosing to disconnect that autopilot higher than 200 feet, I think is what was said. And so in that way, it is making sure that I am being a professional pilot. And so we are encouraging, when we see this around the globe, this need to have pilots, no matter their level, no matter the aircraft that they are flying, we are encouraging them to make sure that they are proficient in hand flying.
Hello, can I step ahead of the panel, that way I'm not at y'all's backs here? All right. So good afternoon, my name is Wyatt Pagan. I'm a sophomore in aerospace engineering here at Embry-Riddle, and here's a little bit more of a technical sort of question. Recently in the industry, I've been seeing a shift toward supersonics in terms of the X-59 and some test beds that are currently in development. So what are some of the concerns that are being raised on the return to supersonics, if at all, and what sort of steps are we moving toward implementing that into aerospace safety?
So I actually was at the Global Aviation Symposium at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce last week, and I met the CEO of Boom. And I told him I just listened to one of his recent podcasts. It's pretty interesting because he was, I think, electrical engineer who asked the question, why did we stop supersonic flight? And he went down this rabbit hole of teaching himself all about engines and basically developed an engine working with some of the other engine manufacturers that solves for that sonic boom to where as it's flying, you aren't hearing it on the ground. We aren't hearing it. And so as someone who's had the privilege of flying supersonic, this means you want to go faster. The public won't know the difference. Now, what the design of the aircraft looks like and everything else is something different. He says it's probably about 5 years away before that comes about. And so, in fact, Congress in the most recent FAA reauthorization pass new legislation that allows for further exploration of the engines and for rules that allow for supersonic. So everything that needs to take place to allow for it safely and integrated into our current ecosystem is there. From a flying perspective, they aren't going to land supersonic. When I was flying F-18s, I fly supersonic at cruise, but when I came down, I was just like everybody else. And so I think sometimes there's a misperception that I'm going to be coming in at 100, Lacey at 150 miles an hour, and there's the other guy coming in at Mach 2.0. No. So it'll be the same safe requirements once they get below, 10,000 feet, the same rules apply for everyone. So from a plug perspective, it'll be a non-event. It's just that you're getting from point A to point B quicker.
Understood. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry to have to cut off the Q&A now. We're on a bit of a tight time schedule with the IAB members. However, if you do have a question, we have two that were added to the chat. Please send them to us via email and we will get you answers. And so if you have questions, we will get you an answer. Before you all leave, some of you may have already done it. There's a QR code up there. That is a feedback form. So we would love to hear from you what you thought about the Safer Skies event. And finally, keep an eye out on Ernie and in your email for our next two Safer Skies events. We'll have one in October and November. They'll be great. I can't tell you what they are yet, but they'll be very exciting. So thanks again for being here. Have a great evening.